Ciao amici.
Do you want to? Should I say it? Should I? Welcome to another episode of LingoCast. Today is our first episode. This is Felipe, and
And I'm Sophie. Oh, I
I
don't
believe in quality.
Thank you. I think you should introduce it and say, I'm Felipe, and then I'll go, or you say, I'm Felipe, and this is Sophie, and I'll say, Ciao amici. How's that? Okay.
What's up, everyone, and welcome to our first LingoCast. I'm Felipe, and this is the web podcast where we talk about language learning and best strategies on how you can learn any language in the world. Seriously, even those languages in the Amazon.
I'm Sophie, ciao amici, and I'm happy to be here to talk about learning languages.
So, so there's something that I've always wondered, which is a lot of people ask me, how many languages do you speak? And I get embarrassed, and I'm like, okay, should I say it? Should I say all of them? Should I say, um, what do you mean exactly by how many languages do you speak? That's a question that I ask myself after I'm confronted with this question. And so I'm gonna tell you the issues that I have with this question.
Okay, please do.
So, in the in popular terms, I speak 7 languages, but that's not how I define speaking languages. So I have knowledge of Portuguese, Spanish, French, German, Arabic, Syrian Arabic specifically, and some modern Standard Arabic. Should I count those as two or one? Okay, that's another debate.
Mm-hmm.
I'll did forget any other. Some Italian maybe. I do get some Italian. Apparently, I understand 95% of Italian.
Did you say Russian?
Yes, and also I'm learning Russian. I'm at a 300 level Russian, which that would be intermediate.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and I really don't like counting Russian so as a language I speak because so I get nervous with Russian speakers. They come and then it's like, oh, you speak Russian, and I start speaking, and then yes, I do, but then again, I don't consider myself free enough to express all the ideas I want. So, what about you?
Well, so where do you draw the line between when someone says, what languages do you speak, and you say, I have knowledge of? What is your distinction?
Okay, so I have knowledge of Mandarin Chinese, for example.
Okay.
I studied Mandarin Chinese by myself for a year, and I'm pretty bad at it. but the but the way I define it would be if you can get me a native speaker in front of me, and I can express basically all the main ideas in everyday language. And that's
Okay.
how I say I speak this language. That's how I define that. So not as I wouldn't be consider myself as superior level in all of them. I think the only ones I'm superior in would be Portuguese, Spanish, English,
Mm-hmm.
maybe French, maybe I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, that's how I define it. How do you define it, and what languages do you know or have knowledge of?
Okay, interesting question. English is my native language. French is my second language.
Is it native though? Is it French your native language?
I don't think so. I started learning when I was 5 years old.
Okay, would that be considered native language then?
I don't think it's a native language because it was in an immersion environment at a school, but it wasn't in like a locale where that was, commonly spoken. It was pretty contained within my school. Outside of school, my siblings also did the same program as me, so I could speak French with them, but there wasn't much opportunity for like using French outside of school. So, and starting at 5 years old without the input from, again, like the place where I'm in, like it just kind of, I started learning, and I don't know, I wouldn't necessarily consider that like a native language.
And what other languages do you know?
So then I've also learned Spanish. I'm learning Spanish.
Learning Spanish. You know Spanish
And
pretty well.
I studied Latin in high school.
Okay, that's cool. Would you consider that a language you speak or a language you have knowledge of?
That one's easier to say a language I have knowledge of because it's a dead language.
Can you, if I got you a book in Latin or some Catholic liturgy, would you be able to understand it?
At this point, probably not very much. Right now, I feel like where I am with my Latin, because I'll see things and in paintings or on buildings, you see things in Latin. I can like I can identify parts of speech of words. I can identify sometimes what case the noun is in, what tense the verb is in, but I might not remember the meanings of all these different words.
And what's the other language that you know?
And the last one I've begun learning is Norwegian.
Interesting one. Give me your reasoning.
Well, since I'd studied Romance languages, Latin-based languages, I wanted to kind of branch out from there. And so I picked this Germanic language. I had lots of ideas of what to learn next, but I was interested in Norwegian culture, Scandinavian cultures generally, and learning a Germanic language that I thought would have some similarities with English, and turns out has a lot of lexical similarity with French. Not a ton, but a lot of borrowings from French.
I can see that French influenced all European languages one way or another. I see a lot of French influence in Russian.
Totally.
When it comes to, in German too, when it comes to political, like ökonomisch, économique, or like engagement. Germans use this word, or respectable.
Interesting.
Like things that are more related to, I would say, higher culture, fancy, and it's interesting that you say the French influence, because French mainly influenced literature, and me as a Brazilian Portuguese speaker, Brazilian literature was heavily influenced by French culture, especially during the positivist era. So a lot of the styles actually came from French.
Interesting.
And so yeah, so you say that you speak. So how many? If I asked you, Sophie, how many languages you speak? What's your answer?
I would say 4.
4.
Often I say 3, and I'm learning a 4th one.
So
because I'm such a beginner in Norwegian, but I think I should say 4 because I can speak 4 languages.
Yeah, that's where I would differ from you, because I would not consider Russian a 7th language. Because I would, okay, I do know Russian. I can begin a conversation in Russian, but it would be very broken, very bad.
Sure.
And I would embarrass myself.
Sure.
So like I wouldn't feel, that's just me.
Right.
But then again, at the same time, my Italian is much better than my Russian.
Interesting.
And yet, I don't consider Italian a language that I speak. That's where that's where I want to get this conversation to.
Yeah.
Like, how does one define how many languages you speak? Because I obviously understand more Italian than Russian, but yet I don't count Italian because there's something I was talking to someone about, is that actually I want to clear this up. Language learning is not equal, right? Language families, and I think that this is very, I would say, kind of shoved in under the rug when in language teaching, that people have advantages and disadvantages in learning languages. So you said that when you growing up, you were speaking Spanish, not Spanish, French.
Yes.
And you learned Spanish later in life.
Yes.
How did knowledge of French help you in learning Spanish?
It was really helpful from a lexical standpoint and from a grammatical standpoint. Obviously, there are little differences, and small differences are the hardest ones, I think. Like,
of course.
Like function words like and, or, those kinds of things when they're such small words and very similar in the two, but different. That tripped me up a lot. And there were other grammatical and lexical things, but very quickly, like, before I started kind of formal Spanish classes, I felt pretty familiar with the language because of my background in French. And just a little bit of like self-study got me to a point where I felt like pretty comfortable. And then after like actually studying in a class with a teacher for a while and then getting opportunities to speak with native speakers more, it progressed pretty quickly. So
the only languages where I had a formal training in were obviously English, would say um, Russian and Arabic. But my
Wow.
Arabic, here's interesting about Arabic is that I sometimes I count modern standard Arabic as a different language than the Arabic variant I speak, which is Syrian. So
Hmm.
I speak Syrian Arabic, and I also read and understand and somewhat speak with a very Syrian heavy Syrian, I'll say, influence
Uh-huh.
modern standard Arabic.
Okay.
So that because it has a thing called diglossia, which is when one language you use for television news and formal settings, and then you have a dialect or the vernacular as they call it that they use for anything.
Sure.
But here's the crazy part: they consider these two languages as one. If you ask an Arab, like, are they two languages? And then like, oh, they're one. They're the same thing. The same thing, and yet we consider Portuguese and Spanish or
Mm.
Spanish, Portuguese, and Gallego
Yeah.
as different languages. We talked about Gallego before. What do you think of Gallego? Have you ever heard Gallego?
I'm not that familiar with it. I've heard about it a little bit in classes and things,
Mm-hmm.
but I mean, there's always kind of a continuum, I guess is the point.
Yes. Yeah, that's the thing. That's the interesting thing. That's the interesting thing. And you, as a Norwegian speaker or a beginner Norwegian speaker,
Hmm.
you know a ton about what a continuum is. Can you explain the idea of continuum?
Okay, so there's always kind of a debate about where to draw the lines, the
Yes.
boundaries between languages, dialects, variants, these things. And a good example is Nordic languages like Norwegian, Swedish, Danish, especially. Finnish is in a different family. Icelandic, I guess, is also related, but those three.
What about Faroese?
Faroese, I don't even know about the Faroese. I'm
Faro-
sure it's.
Faroe Islands.
Yeah, I'm sure it's. Well, yeah, I'm sure it's close to Icelandic,
Yeah.
but I've never like really seen it.
Oh.
I've seen like Icelandic written out, and with my little knowledge of Norwegian, I can kind of pick things out.
Really?
But it's very different. It has a case system, which none of those other three have. So between Swedish, Danish, and Norwegian, a lot of people consider those dialects on a continuum of the same language because they share such similarities and they're mutually intelligible. And so I think, um, yeah, there's a lot of, and like between written and spoken, I guess there's differences, like how close they are in the written form versus the spoken form. And again, for me, like I'm still a beginner. I hear Norwegian and I'm still struggling to understand a lot of it. But when I see Swedish or Danish written out and I see Norwegian, it feels like I could read a lot of Swedish and Danish things.
Really?
Yeah. At whatever level I am in Norwegian, feels kind of similar to Danish and Swedish. Of course, there are differences, but they're very similar.
This is, I think this is what I feel about Italian in a way,
Mm-hmm.
because knowing Portuguese, Spanish, and French, going to Italian was a breeze.
Sure.
There's a channel of this guy. If he sees me, so it's gonna tell him that he saved me during the pandemic because all I did was listen to Italian during the pandemic. I would just watch
Wow.
Italian series. I'm like, you know what? Why not Italian, right? Perché non l'italiano?
Perfect timing.
Perché no? Perché no? But then again, I haven't actively studied Italian. That's the difference.
Mm.
So my Italian sounds a mix of between Spanish, French, and Portuguese,
Uh-huh.
but with a lot of Italian influence.
Sure.
But the but his name is the guy from Italiano Automatico, Alberto Arreghini. Cool guy. Shout out to this guy. Love that guy. And I would just watch his videos constantly, and and I'll be like, I understand literally everything this guy says.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, he was speaking to foreigners, so he was speaking slower. In series, they would speak very differently, using a lot of slang,
Right.
and so I would sometimes struggle picking up the Italian series. But when he spoke very clearly, very with a the positively, I would say, to a point of like, okay, I can pick up everything, 100% of what everything this guy's saying.
Wow.
But then again, for me to produce it, that was the struggle, because I would
Right.
bring a ton of false cognates of Portuguese, of Spanish,
Yeah.
and then sometimes people would say like oh, you're speaking Spanish with a very Italian accent. Are you Argentinian by any chance?
Amazing.
And that's the thing, right? I can, if I put a little bit of effort, I could add one more language. It's like, hey, I speak 8 languages and all these, and then 4 of them are from the Latin branch.
And so that's why you're saying like language learning isn't equal.
Exactly, because someone can say, oh, I speak 10, and then they are like all Latin languages
Right.
with, or all Slavic languages, or
Sure.
or we
All
even-
Germanic.
all Germanic. Okay, Germanics. The Germanic languages are interesting because they are quite different from each other quite a lot. I mean,
But there's
yeah,
a bit
like
of overlap that would
overlap,
be
like
helpful.
North Germanic, like the Scandinavian languages. They're different, but I'm talking more like, for
But
example, English. Can you pick up a lot of German knowing English? It's actually
Again, like
harder.
lexically.
Lexically, sometimes,
Yeah.
but it's not.
And like Norwegian and German, I've noticed. I don't know German, but I have friends who speak German, and I can see like the overlap. It would be helpful.
Yeah,
It might not be as helpful as maybe like within the Romance language.
Yes, I picked up the I could pick up some Norwegian patterns.
Yeah.
And when you were showing me Norwegian that day,
Right.
we used to work together translating
Back in the day.
back in the day. It was like last month.
Yeah.
and I remember that with Norwegian, sometimes I'll be like, please tell me. I was like, I bet the German is the same word, and they're like, yeah, I can see the root. Like, yeah.
Right. Right.
And so there's this overlap in languages, and this is something interesting. Like I said, language learning is not equal,
Mm-hmm.
even in translation, even translating from language to language,
Sure.
because you're also translating a worldview.
Yes.
And we were just when we were working together in translation. She translated for French, and I translated for Portuguese.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember that the Japanese guys, they had a harder time translating to Japanese, and it took it longer than we did.
Yes. Definitely. There's more adaptation maybe that's necessary to communicate certain concepts.
Civilizational difference, I would say,
Mm.
a lot of it. Civilizational or mindset difference.
Mm.
Sometimes concepts are not even a thing in that language, so you have to put an extra effort to translate that.
Right. Yeah, I think it's interesting to. I'm taking a semantics class right now.
Oh, is it?
And it's interesting, and there's a lot of like there aren't a ton of words maybe that are universal or concepts that are universal across all languages.
Tell me more about that.
Let's see what I remember from my class. There's like a running list. We didn't talk about the study behind this, but there's like a list of some things that are potentially universal across languages. This is alarming. Like mother, child, sky.
Can you actually get that?
Yeah.
So while she's fixing that, let me expand on that. I think it's called it's a list of 200 words that are that linguists use in the field to that supposedly they're bias free, but then they're like, yeah, there's a little bit of bias there, that conveys ideas like water, fire, mother, child, nose, mouth, or hand, blood, or things like human things that are
And concrete.
they're in concrete things that are present in the human experience. These were supposedly they exist in every language.
Right.
So
but when it comes to abstract concepts,
yes,
that's harder. So thinking about like translating from English to Japanese, for example, like a translator doesn't think about these things on a daily basis necessarily, but it's interesting to think about the meanings of words and how to communicate meaning from one language to another.
Mm-hmm.
And so when it comes to these more abstract things, sometimes it can be harder perhaps to find an equivalent in another language or find a way to explain something if there's no good equivalent.
And this where I want to solidify my point with language learning is not equal, because a lot of it you really have to dive in to the worldview of that civilization or culture to actually understand what they're saying. Especially because this is one of the reasons why there are conflicts because some people don't understand each other. So they in these actually playing to the mind. There's a have you heard the Worfian hypothesis?
Yeah.
Yeah, the so some people actually dispute that, but I think there's some truth. I haven't gone deeper into that hypothesis, but there's some truth into that. But I believe that's not fully. I'll
Yeah.
say doesn't encompass the whole truth, but I can see that being some truth. What do you think about it?
Yeah. So Sapir-Whorf hypothesis or Whorfian hypothesis
Mm-hmm.
is essentially like,
Is this a peer or saper?
I don't know, last name of some guy, Sapir, and another guy, Whorf. But essentially, tell me if I'm getting this right. Essentially, the idea is that uh, the language we know, perhaps our native language in
Yeah.
our brain, informs our worldview.
Mm-hmm.
Is that essentially right?
It shapes the worldview to the point that you cannot distinguish some concepts or like separate some concept from that because it literally distinguishes it and it affects your decisions
Right.
based on that worldview.
Yeah.
that you
So,
have.
like maybe one example, it's maybe not a great example, but for example, different languages have different verb tenses, right, and different conceptions of time when it comes to verbs, and that can affect. I think we talked about a study in one of my classes that was like financial decisions. If the language is more has more ways of speaking in the past or more ways of speaking in the future or things like this, that can affect, maybe you can find a correlation between that and people's financial decisions. But I think, like you're saying, there's a strong take on that. There's a strong kind of subscribing to that in a strong
Yeah.
way, and there's kind of a weaker version that I would be more inclined
Yeah,
to.
like I heard the same similar thing saying that languages that don't have grammatical gender they tend to be more egalitarian. But
Interesting.
but here's the thing: you take Turkish for example. Turkish doesn't have gender, grammatical gender, and yet Turkish is very
Right.
patriarchal. But then again, one can argue, oh, they're because of they're like that because of Islam, and then I'm here thinking, well, every language go every language is also related to culture, to religion. This is why
Totally.
it is. This is why you can't separate language, place, religion, way of
Totally.
thinking. Even even an expression that I grew up in, Vixe Maria. You know what Vixe Maria is?
No.
It's from northeastern Brazil. Actually, a lot of Brazilians say it today, but from what I know, it originated in northern Brazil
Interesting.
or in Portugal. I don't know, but basically it's an expression. It would be it's an expression of I would say surprise, like Vixe Maria, like. But the thing is Vixe Maria, but it's a contraction, a devoicing of Virgem Maria.
Okay. Interesting.
But yeah, so basically you
So the
say the
Virgin
Virgin
Mary.
Mary.
Interesting.
Yeah, but then again, even a non-Catholic
Right.
in Brazil will say that and
Right.
won't think about it.
Yes.
But then again, religion affecting language again.
Totally. I've seen that in Latino cultures as well.
Yeah,
and
they will do things like that. But just because the civilization is Catholic,
Right.
you still have that connection to the Catholic Church.
Totally. It's
Whether
ingrained in
it's ingrained.
the language
Yeah.
and like occasionally sometimes mindsets and how society develops and
Exactly. You know, it plays a big role too. So this is like would say that language learning is not equal. That there's always these little things because and then goes again to the idea of how does one take into account how many languages one speak. As I always speak seven, but then again, oh, do you actually speak seven? So that because my way of defining it is not probably not the same way as another person defines it.
yeah.
It's, maybe in someone's mind, I only speak three because I can only get to a very deep, abstract understanding of these three languages, and I'm never able to understand, and I won't be able to understand like Arabic, for example, unless
Yeah.
I lived years and years in Arab country.
Yeah. And the cultural knowledge that comes with learning a
Yes.
language.
Yes, cultural knowledge plays a big role too,
Yeah.
because there will be social cues. There will be context and appropriate words you can say and not say.
Yeah.
I will, in going back to translation, I always go back to translation. With my partners, we were speaking, we were translating Portuguese, and he had he's married to a Mexican woman,
Mm-hmm.
and one of the speakers were translating text, and it was, oh, it's how stupid, and I was translating to stupid. I was like, oh, don't say that. It's like, yeah, we don't have a problem with that. So it's okay to say that in Portuguese. It's not that
Right.
heavy, but it will carry a big thing. It will carry a very bad connotation in Mexican Spanish.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's fascinating.
it's fascinating. But yeah, but yeah, not knowing that doesn't mean that you speak that language or not. That's the thing.
That's another variable, yeah.
So no, there are many variables to say, oh, just speak a language, you speak not a language. I can go to Galicia, or to Barcelona
Mm-hmm.
and learn Catalan very easily,
Mm-hmm.
given all my knowledge of Latin culture,
Yeah.
Latin languages, and yet I'm gonna struggle with Serbo-Croatian, for example. But it can help me given that I know Russian,
Sure.
given that I know Russian. But remember but then again, what's the language I struggle the most with? Mandarin Chinese.
Right.
Very distant, very
Yes.
so
Unrelated. In a lot
unrelated
of
to
ways.
any European or I'll say Semitic language I previously knew.
Yeah.
So also this very civilizational difference. So I struggled a lot. So that's when I say, oh, I want to learn this language, this many languages. I'm like, well, um, which ones?
Yeah.
So so coming down, I'm much more impressed with someone saying, oh, I speak Mandarin, Portuguese, Russian, and Arabic than someone who's like, oh, I speak all the 10 Latin languages. I'm more impressed by
Sure.
even though they speak less, the the
Like the depth
the depth
that
and
they
the
know.
knowledge that they need to acquire to be able to speak that.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Great point.
What about you?
Well, I think we need to wrap up soon.
So so the so thank you for watching this podcast. If you got here to the end, say a word. Say a word to say if they got to the end.
Oh, in the comments?
Yeah, the comments. What word?
You should say Norge.
Norga. How to spell that?
Norge. Go Norway.
No, Norge. Norga. If you got to this point, write Norga. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye.